Tenet was a big film that hit late in 2020, only barely being affected by the pandemic lockdowns. With crazy forwards and backwards going on, it was certainly hard to follow at times. However, I'm lucky and don't have to worry about that with this opening sequence. Let's take a look at the opening opera siege and see how accurate the orchestra actually is. As you will see by several points I bring up, I'm going to approach this from a professional orchestra perspective, especially since this is supposed to be at a big opera house with a large audience. But the actual orchestra is never stated, and with only about 30 seconds of total orchestra, there's a lot to say, so let's jump in. First, I want to address that this is called the opera siege, but there's no opera being performed. This hall is supposed to be the National Opera of Ukraine or the Kiev Opera House, but the shooting location is the Lina Hall in Estonia, which isn't a hall meant for orchestra concerts. Even though this is not an opera, you can certainly have a regular orchestra concert at an opera house. Even comedies can be there, like Robin Williams' Live at the Met. The first bit that we hear is the orchestra tuning mixed with the movie soundtrack. Why this was done, I have no idea, and I honestly want to know where they got the audio for the orchestra tuning. Orchestras tune to A4, typically at 440 Hz, but that number does vary slightly. However, the dominant pitch we hear here is E5, about 660 Hz. And by about, I mean they are incredibly out of tune. Strings do tune their other strings, one being the E string. It is highly unlikely that we would hear it this dominant. A more accurate representation of an orchestra tuning is Monty Python's Spamalot. The conductor tapping the stand is such a cliche. It never happens in the professional setting. Maybe in a smaller regional orchestra for getting the musician's attention in a rehearsal, but never at a concert. Actually, in the professional setting, the conductor isn't even on stage at this point. The concertmaster, or the principal violin, would be the one that leads the tuning, and no one is cut off. Every musician is given all the time that they need to tune, and there's usually 3 tuning notes given. One for the woodwinds, one for the brass, and one for the strings. And on some occasions, you'll get 1A for the high strings and 1A for the low strings. I have yet to see an instance where someone takes too much time tuning. Little goof coming up is the violin player here smiles as she ducks down, maybe laughing at someone yelling bang to simulate the explosion on set. And then a little later, for more goofs, we have 2 members of the orchestra that missed the message that they were supposed to be passed out. And this is so weird watching this scene when there are extras who missed the memo. The audience is guilty of this too. We now look onward from backstage with the intruders and we see 2 sousaphones. These are never used by professional orchestras, and I've never heard or seen it used by any orchestra or concert band. The sousaphone was invented to make it easier to carry a tuba for marching bands for the, well, you guessed it, John Philip Sousa band. Today, some marching corps use a contrabass bugle instead, but it is never used by tuba players in orchestras. In the next shot, we see a double bass being taken and thrown to the ground, but this person is behind the horn section? In perhaps rare circumstance, this might happen, but there's so much extra room on stage that this would never happen. I'll address the orchestra setup and instrumentation more in a minute, but a big thing to note is that there is almost always no one behind the horns so that their sound can reflect off the back wall. Also, given the distance from the back wall, the horns will most certainly sound late. And I'm even assuming that that's a wall and not a curtain. Later we see a saxophone player on the ground. Saxophones are incredibly rare in orchestras, so this isn't technically wrong, but more on that when I look at the full instrumentation. We also don't know what piece is being performed. There are only blurred looks at the music, and it seems everyone has the same music, and I mean exactly the same. Not just different parts, but we could potentially place a guess based on instrumentation. Aside from the 2 tubas and a single sax, what other instruments can we see that would help with the instrumentation? Well, in this shot, and thanks to a 4K version of this, we can see 3 trombones with a rogue trumpet, 8 sax players, all seemingly on alto saxophones, 10 clarinets and oboes, 4 trumpets together, 4 horns, 5 flutes, and 2 piccolos. In the very first shot of the film, we can see 2 baritones or euphoniums. I think it's safe to say that this is a random bunch, with a seemingly random setup on stage. I also couldn't find any other evidence of who these instrumentalists are, like I was able to for the Leverage episode. This scene is real enough for the purpose of the film, minus the conductor tapping on the stand. Oh, it's so cringy. But with any thought into it, you see the bigger holes, especially by the fact that the orchestra is on screen for only 30 seconds, and this video has far exceeded that. maybe this is the real reason they stormed the concert and it had nothing to do with some algorithm. So that's my look into the opening scene of Tenet. What other films and TV shows have an orchestral element that I should take a look into next? Let me know down below in the comments, and I'll see you all next time.